On May 18th, 2024, I visited Valleyfair in Minneapolis, Minnesota for the first time, and while I was there, I rode Renegade, their GCI wooden roller coaster. After 15 rides on Renegade over the course of the day, I determined that it is my favorite roller coaster in Minnesota and one of my 20 favorite roller coasters ever. This is my in-depth review of the best roller coaster in the state of Minnesota, Renegade at Valleyfair. Renegade is located about as far away from Valleyfair's entrance as you can get, only beaten out by Excalibur, which is all the way to the back of the park and through the water park away from the entrance. Because of that location, most of Renegade's layout is located outside of the park's boundaries, so it's kind of hard to get footage of it outside of that final finale section that goes right by the station. While annoying for people like me trying to make this kind of video, it's actually pretty great for the guests in the park because it creates this air of mystery around what the layout is, as all you can see from the station is that return bit and the lift hill and its drop. So once the train leaves the lift hill, the guests can't see any of the ride until it gets back to that portion near the station. Because of that, I genuinely had no idea what the layout was about until I actually rode the ride, which really made it a lot cooler traversing that layout for the first time. Speaking of the layout, let's run through it. Renegade begins with a few fun laterals out of the station as it makes its way to the left to get to the lift hill. Once it reaches the top of its 97.5 foot tall lift hill, Renegade drops into one of the coolest parts of the ride and one of the greatest elements on any GCI I've ever been on, its twisted first drop. It cannot quite be understated how insanely whippy this drop is in the back row, to the point that I feel like you have to ride this in the back row to really get the full experience of this ride, because you do not feel the same forces anywhere else in the train that you do in the back row for that drop. In the front row, you get a weird forward hang time sensation as you wait for the rest of the train to catch up with you and you hang over the edge of the drop, but in the back row, you get flung over that hill and then slammed into the left side of the train as the track curls back to the right and then back to the left. You get multiple bursts of laterals while getting airtime on that drop, and it's a feeling that I don't think can be replicated in any other ride. I've never seen something like it. It is absolutely a highlight of this experience, and cannot be beaten by any other portion of this ride except for the one immediately afterwards. As you reach the bottom of the first drop and hit the first valley of the ride, you get some pretty serious jackhammering from the train as the ride gets pretty rough at that moment. But just as it starts to get rough, you get flung into that first airtime hill, which is at least 3 seconds of sustained floater airtime, something I have never felt on a GCI like that, and it's a truly incredible moment. This moment feels accentuated by the fact that the valley before it was so rough, so that when you hit that airtime moment and leave your seat, it's like bliss going from all of that rattling to nothing for 3 to 4 seconds. It's kind of hard to explain it, but it sort of feels like an oasis, with the roughness being like a desert, where you just meet this beautiful bliss right at the end of it. That description probably sounds corny as fuck, but that's how I'm going to describe it, because that's how it felt to me. So at this point, the ride has already peaked, with both of its best moments having already happened, but the rest of the ride is no slouch either. You immediately swing into an overbank, and then immediately into some of GCI's trademark transitional airtime moments. If you don't know what I'm talking about, this is my favorite part about most GCI wooden roller coasters. GCIs always feel so wildly out of control, and this can mostly be attributed to the way that they incorporate airtime into all of their transitions and changes of direction. The end of this first overbank is a great example of this, as instead of the ride just slowly turning into its drop, it gives you a pop of floater airtime as it switches from the overbank into the drop down into the valley. So instead of you just turning a little bit, you get airtime and then are flung to the right as the train changes directions. These transitions are what I crave about GCIs and is why I love them so much. And I found that Renegade doesn't have nearly as many of them as other GCIs like Mystic Timbers or Gold Striker at California's Great America, but it has a lot of regular airtime moments that pack a lot more of a punch than those little transitional moments do. So the trade-off for Renegade is that it feels like a less hectic ride, but has much more sustained, stronger airtime. The next example of this comes immediately after the transition we were just discussing, as Renegade pulls up into a second strong, sustained floater airtime moment. This one isn't quite as strong or sustained as that first airtime hill, but it still packs a punch. Moving on from the airtime hill, Renegade then launches into an extended S-bend, with a turn to the right followed by a turn to the left, with nearly 90-degree angles on those turns. These two moments provide some solid laterals and are just visually fun to experience on the ride. The train then careens into another of those transitional airtime moments, this time with the airtime pop happening as you move into the hill, with a pop of airtime into a left turn that sweeps around for a little bit. This is the only part of the ride that I would dare call a dead spot in any way, but it's a nice reprieve, especially considering how rough the ride's about to get for the next few elements. Traversing through another of those transitional airtime moments, this time exiting the turn and heading downhill, Renegade hits a long right turn that is probably the roughest portion of the ride. You get some serious sustained lateral forces to the left, and if you're sitting on the left side of the train, this can get pretty uncomfortable because the train itself is rattling pretty hard here. I wouldn't say that any part of this ride is unbearable by any means, but after riding it as many times as I did, this portion became a bit more of a chore to experience than the rest of the ride. I would absolutely be lying if I said that this didn't take a pretty significant toll on me and tire me out pretty badly by the end of my marathon. As it pulls out of that turn, the ride pops up into its third sustained floater airtime moment, which is just as good as the previous one, but not quite as good as the first still. This moment, like the first airtime moment, is a nice reprieve from the roughness from the previous element, so it feels a lot better because of the fact that you're no longer feeling that roughness and get that floaty feeling instead. After that airtime hill, there's a slight bend to the left, and then another airtime hill, which is a lot taller than the previous one, so it doesn't really provide any airtime, but is again a bit of a reprieve before that final stretch of the ride. This is the first moment of the ride outside of the lift hill that is actually visible from footpaths and from the station, so you can actually map out the rest of the layout from this point onward, but before then is all completely unknown, which is what made it work so well as a surprise the first time I rode this. After crawling over that hill, Renegade then makes a right turn into another pop of airtime, transitioning into a left turn that wraps around the station. This turn doesn't really do anything forces-wise, but is a great visual from both the station and from the footpaths next to Renegade. After completing that turnaround, Renegade flies into my third favorite part of the ride, the airtime hill station flyby. This moment provides a nice 1 to 2 seconds of sustained floater airtime right as you're screaming past the station, and the visuals both on and off ride are awesome, as you can stare into the station from the train or stare at the train from the station. It's a really cool dynamic. Immediately after the station flyby airtime hill, Renegade pops right into another airtime hill, which is just as sustained and just as floaty as the one before it. Honestly, it might as well be the exact same airtime hill, with the main difference being that it's not directly next to the station anymore. Then, once that airtime hill is finished, you take a quick left turn into a transitional airtime pop into the brake run, and the ride is over. Renegade is a very interesting ride that I feel like actually benefits from how rough it gets at certain points because it accentuates how nice the airtime is on each of those pops as they come. I genuinely think that if this ride was smooth, those airtime moments wouldn't feel as special as they do in comparison to the rest of the ride, so I like it the way that it is, even though it rattled my bones like crazy. Unfortunately, it's not my favorite GCI, it's probably my fourth favorite, honestly, but I really do love what it does, and that first airtime hill after the first drop is truly a magical moment that is very high up there on my favorite elements on any ride. And that first drop is easily the best GCI first drop by a mile, and might be one of the best wooden roller coaster drops in general. I don't really give number grades or letter grades to roller coasters, but to provide some sort of score for this ride sits at number 18 on my list of 285 roller coasters I've ridden as of the date of this upload. This is obviously subject to change, but my rankings are not any sort of concrete scale, so it doesn't really matter. All that you really need to know is that this ride is great and you should ride it if you get a chance to. That's going to do it for my review of Renegade at Valleyfair. If you've ridden this ride and you like it just as much as me, let me know in the comments section. If you liked this review, please like it, and if you like the videos that I make just like this one, please subscribe. I'm really enjoying making a lot of YouTube videos recently, and I hope I can continue it for as long as I feel like it, which could be a very long time. Who knows? I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.